Hey, check it out. It's Handsome Aaron here, and I'm in a recording booth. Uh, don't get used to this, because I'm not supposed to be in here, but there's no one watching the place, and I just thought it would be cool to record a video in here. So, someone might come in at some point and kick me out, but it's a cool place for me to make a video. There's even a microphone in here I think I've got hooked up. Hopefully, it's recording. Uh, and this is where we're gonna do a video. So, the only thing I could think of to talk about was a game I recently played called Haven. So, you might not have heard of Haven. It's a small game from last year. It's it's uh it's it's an interesting game. It's kind of difficult to talk about. A long time ago, Yancey Croshaw, who's a reviewer I really like, once said that in video games, there's a curious relationship with relationships where a lot of games kind of end, or stories in general, with characters getting together. Or the characters will be together so that one of those two characters can get murdered or kidnapped as a motivation for the player character. And there's very few games about two people just in a healthy, happy relationship with one another. I think he said that about the game Catherine. Anyway, that's what Haven is. Haven is a game basically just about two characters being in love. And a lot of the game is just watching scenes of them interacting and being in love. It almost feels like a visual novel that they added gameplay to. But what exactly is Haven? It's a sci-fi, I guess, like third person kind of adventure game with very light survival mechanics. It follows these two characters, K and U, and they're on this planet together. They've escaped from like a totalitarian government called the Apiary just before the game started. Frankly, them escaping from the Apiary sounds more exciting than basically anything that happens in the actual game, but they're just hiding out on this planet together. It's a kind of unique setting that I like. The planet you're on is like a bunch of interconnected islands, and you explore them by like going these like paths that connect one island to the next. Um, but there's some neat kind of sci-fi ideas in it, I guess. It does two things I really like with its storytelling. One is that there's clearly a lot of thought to this universe that they're in, but you only see it through the lens of these two characters just talking to each other on this planet. And I like that, the idea of bigger science fiction or fantasy worlds that you see only through a little window, but like there's enough hinting at what's out there. And another thing it does that I quite like with is like a personal taste thing. Is it's a science fiction universe with space travel and like colonized planets, but it's not like it's like pretty clear how big the universe is. Like in something like Star Trek or Star Wars, the universe is functionally infinite as far as the writing is concerned. What you don't see as often is like there's like four planets, so there is like space travel and colonizing other worlds, but it's also really specific how big that universe is. Anyway, I've kind of gotten off track. The bulk of the game is just kind of exploring around. You fly around in these like hover boots and just kind of gather materials and explore islands. Um, a lot of whether or not you like the game is gonna be whether or not you like U and K. I think I said that about the previous game I talked about. Call of the Sea is whether or not you like Nora is a big part of it, and here it's even more whether or not you care about K and U is a big part of it. And I like him well enough. I like U a little bit more than K. She's a little bit that U is the girl. She's a little bit more interesting. Because a lot of the game is the two of them just hanging out, having sex. You don't see that, but Yeah, they have a lot. I guess if it's just you and your girlfriend or boyfriend stranded on a planet for the rest of your lives, you'd have a lot of sex. Not a bad way to spend life. Um, in terms of the gameplay, it has, like I said, it's very light survival elements because a lot of the game is just going around the islands looking for a material called rust that you use to craft a certain thing, some stuff, and then food and medical supplies. Those are the three things that you craft, and basically the three things that you find as you explore around. Food, healing items, and this stuff called rust they use to make these like consumable items that give you bonuses. Thing is, you don't actually need to eat. It's just that your characters do worse in the combat. There is a combat to the game. We'll get to that. They don't do their stuff as quickly in the combat. And also food is everywhere and you don't need to eat very often, so it's like not a concern at all. It's like just not even a thing you ever have to worry about after the first couple minutes of the game. Um, and it's similar with the healing items. You can take a lot of hits before you need to heal, and the healing items are again pretty abundant, so it's very rarely an issue. The one issue it does have is that you can't actually heal while you can only heal when you're at your base or at your camp. And as a result, I ended up going long stretches of time without. The only times I died is because I didn't want to stop at the camp or the base to heal, because you have to do a lot of backtracking to get to them. There's not very many of them, and then you have to walk back to wherever you were, and you have to go through like loading screens and cutscenes. So I tried not to do it because it just felt like a huge waste of time. But then that's the only time I ever died in the game. So that's a bit of annoyance. And then there's this rust stuff that you'll end up with a ton of, like way more of it than you ever need to craft these items that I personally never used other than the healing ones. Because one of the items you can craft with the rust lets you heal without going to the camps, and that's ended how I ended up mostly healing. Anyway, so the survival and crafting is like really light, and you barely have to engage with it to the degree it feels like they wanted you to, because and then there's the combat. There is combat in the game. At first I thought it was turn-based, but it's not. It just feels like it would be. Instead, you just like charge up your stuff and attack as quickly as you like can. It's really simple. You only have four moves you can do: punch, shoot, block, or pacify. Pacify is basically how you finish the enemies off. So you do that every fight, but only when it tells you to do it. And then punch and blast are identical. It's just some enemies are weaker to it than others, and you have to do it in like certain timing. So the combat's kind of unique. I've personally never played anything quite like it, but it's really simple. It's pretty repetitive. Until you find a new enemy, and you have to just figure out like which of those two attacks they're more vulnerable to, and the timing of when to do it. There's not much to it. It's fine. It feels like it just kind of had to be there. I never really looked forward to it, and I generally just avoid, because it's really easy to just avoid engaging with the enemies in the game too. So it's also a little bit broken, and this is a thing. The game crashed. I played it on the Xbox One, and the game crashed on me once. And then a lot of the time in combat, the character, you'll charge up their attack, and then they would just refuse to do it. They would just sit there and just die instead. That was very irritating. It's when they just refuse to attack. So that's a problem that the game has, and it happened throughout the whole game. Now, it's possible that I just don't understand the combat, and there was a reason that they weren't attacking, but the game never explained it. So if that is the case, it's still poor design on their part. And actually, that's a bit of an issue the game has in general, is it doesn't explain a couple of things. I ended up having to look up how to level up, because there is a XP and a level up mechanic. It's obvious from the way it works when you have like a bar that goes up when you fight enemies or do certain plot points. and it got full, and I just had no idea what I was supposed to do, and ended up having it. It turns out you're just supposed to interact with this like device in the corner of your home, but it never tells you that. Um, and there's a couple things it never tells you, and you kind of just have to figure out. And then, so God, what was I was going to say? Saying that it never explained. I can't remember. There was something else that never. Oh, right. One of the main things you actually do in the game is just kind of grind along these blue lines all over the place. And some of the blue lines you grind along and they let you get up into the sky and like get to places you normally can't get to. But then throughout the whole game there are blue lines just on the ground. And I played the whole game. They're everywhere. It's like one of the main things you do in the game is just grind along these blue lines as you explore the islands. And I still can't tell you what they do. I think they make you faster. I think grinding might be faster than walking. But not by much, and if it does something else, I couldn't figure it out. So that feels like an issue. God, I feel like there was more I wanted to talk about this fucking game. The exploration, there's a few problems with the exploration as well. And the exploration is most of the game. And it feels okay. There's like little things you find while exploring that are kind of unique, but they're pretty few and far between. They were enough for me to want to find them. They're like little trinkets you put around your house. But most of the islands are way too similar. You very rarely find anything new from one island to the next. They all have like the same enemies to fight, basically the same food and medicines. You find them all fairly quickly. There's only 3 of each, 3 types of food and 3 types of medicine, and a handful of different enemies. But again, even the different ones feel pretty samey because the combat's very simple. You just find these piles of rust that you have to collect from each island, and each island visually looks very similar. So you very rarely, yeah, there's like no island other than your home island that I feel any kind of attachment to. I mean, like, you compare it to something like, I don't know, Subnautica. Subnautica's a great game, and the ocean starts to feel very familiar to you over time, and it feels like almost like home. If I was playing Subnautica and I went to a new location, and suddenly that location was like all different geographically, that would really freak me out. Whereas in Haven, I beat the whole thing, and you could like take all the islands and randomly rearrange them on the map, and I probably wouldn't notice because they all just feel like kind of the same place. Even when they do feel different, they feel not different enough for them to really stand out. Visually similar. I guess speaking of the visuals, there's a game called Furi, one of my favorite games ever. And this game visually reminded me of Furi. And actually the sound design was a lot like Furi as well. A similar kind of synth music and energy to it. Gameplay-wise, it could not be more different. Furi is about like awesome boss fights that you fight at like super speed with a million bullets all over the place, and this game's mostly about walking around and picking stuff off the grounds, watching 2 characters talk to each other. But it looks like Furi, so I guess that's almost a point in its favor because I love everything about Furi. I should do a video on Furi instead. But then there's the story. I want to talk about the story a little bit before I close out here. The story is really odd. You early on, like the first thing that happens is your ship that you live in gets wrecked up. So the characters are like, I guess we'll just like go around. I guess first of all, the story, the basis of the story is you. That was a person. I might get kicked out of this in a minute. So I'm going to try to finish this quickly. The basis of the story is you go, your 2 characters have escaped from this kind of totalitarian government. An element of the totalitarian government is that they tell you who you have to marry, which is like a way of a very strange element to just explain why these two being in love itself is like this rebellious act, because they're not supposed to be matched together. Um, but basically, early on, after they get to this planet, their ship gets wrecked up, and it's like, I guess we'll fix the ship. And that is, I made a joke at the time of like, how funny would it be if like the plot was just we have to fix our ship because a random earthquake wrecked it. And it turns out that basically is the plot. Other stuff gets introduced along the way, but that is the follow through from the beginning to the end. That the thing that kicks off you doing stuff is the ship got wrecked, and the thing that the last thing you do in the story is find the last piece of the ship. That is what you are doing. And along the way, I say other stuff gets introduced. Really, only two other things get introduced. At one point, there's this stuff of like trying to contact the you character's mom, and then at the very end, a new element is introduced when this other character kind of shows up. Um, and what's weird about it is that one, you there is no reason why you're trying to fix the ship. That is what you're doing throughout the game, and there's no reason for it. They're not stuck on the planets. They're there because they want to be there, because it's a way they can get away from this controlling government. Um, so they're just fixing the ship for something to do. It's not going to allow them to go anywhere that they can't already go. So narratively, it's just because why not? Just to kill the time. And gameplay wise, for some reason, it also doesn't unlock new mechanics for you, which to me seems kind of obvious. It should be as you attach parts to the ship, it lets you do more stuff on the ship. But no, there even is an element to the game where new mechanics are introduced, like the ability to craft those consumable items, or like a garden. At some point, you plant a garden. But they're not because you're repairing the ship. So both narratively and gameplay wise, there really is no reason for what you're doing throughout the entire story. And then you do use the ship at the very end to go to the final locate. Like you get the final piece, and then it allows you to take the ship to go to the final area of the plot. But that's not introduced till later, and it feels like you didn't need the ship for that. But speaking of it not being introduced till later, that's the other thing about the story. You're running around, exploring islands, just doing your thing, just living life basically, and then a probe shows up, introduces a new character, introduces basically the new central conflict of the story, and in that same conversation, that same cutscene, introduces the solution to that problem, and not 15 minutes later, I had beaten the game. It all just happens at the game is, I don't know, probably good 12 hours, I'd say I spent playing, 12 to 15, something like that. And what you could call the main antagonist, I guess, and the solution to the problem, and the resolution to that problem, all come in the last, seriously, half an hour. If you were really into exploring, if you wanted to keep exploring, which at this point I kind of didn't, because like I said, it doesn't feel like you're getting much out of the exploration. I'm sure you could keep playing longer. You could go to every island and clear every island of rust. That's a thing you're doing along the way. And that could take several more hours. But by the time, for me, they introduced the final plot, I had everything I needed to go solve it right then. So it's weird. The ending feels very strange because of that, but I liked it still. I hate to give a similar final conclusion to this video that I gave to the previous one about Call of the Sea, but it is like a game that I enjoyed playing. I think more so than Call of the Sea, this game will stick with me. I don't think I'll ever really think about Call of the Sea in the future, but Haven is pretty unique. There really is no other game I've ever played that I can directly compare it to. It's got like the combat of an RPG, these weird little survival elements, this strong emphasis on what feels like a visual novel, and odd little bits of world building and that I quite like. Yeah, Haven isn't a great game. Oh, I should probably say as well, I think it was probably meant for you to play with another person. So that would probably change the experience quite a bit. It's two player, where one of you can play as you and one of you can play. Kind of like oh, what's that game that's really popular? I haven't played it myself. What the fuck is it? With the talking book, and you're like a husband and wife going through some troubles. It's kind of like that game. It was probably meant to be played with like your actual real life significant other, which would really change the experience because it is. But unlike those other games, you can play it perfectly well by yourself. So keep that in mind too. But yeah, I'd say Haven is a unique enough game that I would check it out. I recommend checking out Haven. Uh, I didn't look up how much it would cost if I actually paid for the game. I think if it's $20 or below, I would pick up Haven. Yeah. Um, you'll probably be bored by a fair bit of it, but I think you'll enjoy enough of it, and enough of it will stick with you because of its uniqueness that I would check it out. Anyway, don't look forward to seeing me in this room again in the future, because I really doubt I'm going to be able to get access to it again. But who knows?